So I'm generally trying to apply indigenous and decolonial knowledge perspectives on euro-descendant people's culture. And that means that I see a lot of differences and similarities between those marginalized indigenous positions and that majority beneficiary position that I speak from myself. Right, so here's a case where I think you see both difference and similarity sort of emphasized or accentuated here. So I was born on this farm that you see behind me right there, or my parents lived there while I was born at a hospital. My father, in fact, was also born there, but I didn't grow up there because, we grew up in another farm not so far from here, and that I'm much more attached to. So here's the thing. Right down here out in the field, the state is bringing in a high voltage 400 kilovolt electricity transmission line that will traverse Jutland. So imagine these sort of enormous pylons that look like the Eiffel Tower, they'll be 50, 60 meters tall, carrying cables with high voltage electricity through the country. Now, my parents might lose some value on this place that has sort of been attached to the family for some time, and they might get some reimbursement. But the man living on the other side there, just over there on the other side, for him this is an unimaginable nightmare, because this is a farm not only where he was born but also where he grew up. In fact, it's a fifth generation family farm. That is the only place in the world worth living for him. And this electricity line, which is going to look like something out of Blade Runner, will pass 50 meters by his farm. So he is not feeling good right now, I can tell you that. Right. So this is probably somewhat comparable to that experience that many indigenous peoples have had historically. Like just that basics, that somebody comes and just rams some horrible project through your ancient landscape. Like the basic fact of this violation of the land from the outside. Like, we know this land. My father remembers in his childhood how they were taking the cows down to the forest down there, where there's a creek that leads down towards a little clearing with a meadow, and you can pick mushrooms in that forest. And in the fall, in the spring, there's a rare variant of a spring flower growing in there. And right over on the other side, there's an old, probably sacred site, a law-setting site. And there's also an old medieval fortification where you can find hops, because monks probably brought hops for producing beer and that sort of thing. So it kind of hurts that they're going to bring this horrific monster through this land. But on the other side, we're also modern people. We actually didn't live here, so the attachment is less deep, for instance, than the man who lives over there. My father has had another little farm where I grew up, and that's really the place that I'm attached to, And if this high voltage line had been coming in that place, I wouldn't know what to do with myself, basically. So, and this place here, my parents have actually been trying to sell, because, they're getting older and they can't really keep this place anymore. So it does hurt somehow, but I just imagine that, for many indigenous groups, that would be much, much worse, simply because the attachment to land for these people have been much less destroyed. It must be like being physically abused. And I think there's another difference between this here sort of majority experience and the indigenous experience, and that is the state that's doing this, our relation to that state. That is a state that we are comparatively aligned with, and they have to put this line somewhere, and people live quite close to each other in this old cultural landscape here, so someone will have an electricity line passing by the family farm. Also, it's actually part of the green transition and all that, where electricity becomes increasingly important. So, because it can be produced in more sustainable ways than just burning a lot of fossil fuels. So who can you really be mad at? It's difficult to sort of create a story where someone should have done something in a radically different way. It's kind of just something that kind of just sort of have to happen, right? And they are trying to minimize the impact of this electricity line. They're digging it into the ground in some places. For instance, in the beautiful tracts around the Vejle River Valley, or if it's passing very close to a village and these sort of things. So they are probably doing their best to minimize the hurt that this is going to cause. And, there's also the thing that if we had been, say, some indigenous group in Turtle Island, and this was a pipeline, then it would make much more sense to go out and say, hey, well, we have sovereignty over this land. You can't do this. And in the light of what your state has been doing to us, we honestly really don't give a hoot that you think that this shit is important to you. So it's possible that you could also see the lack of a very deep wound as a result of cultural self-colonization in the Western world. And I think this also says something about what nationalism particularly does to people. Like the fact itself that we are so identified with this state that kind of overrules the attachment to land. Now that's a result of a nationalism. It's a result of an identitarian ideology that has taken people's attachment to land and transferred it onto this political structure, the modern nation state Denmark. Also notice, by the way, that there's an aspect of economy here. When this land is individually owned, that really facilitates abuse of the land, because individuals are, of course, easier to push around if there's no community that can really resist. Basically because the model for ownership is not one that really gives a community ownership. And that makes us vulnerable. It makes us fractured from each other. So the poor man who's living over there, like for him, some recompensation economically doesn't, like, it's a bit like being raped and being paid for it or something. So it's like, but the thing is also that he's kind of alone with this catastrophe. There's not a community of people for him to be angry with, to grieve with, to heal with, because it's just him owning that land. There isn't a community owning it. It's just him. And I think this is something that has also been strategically implemented historically in relation with indigenous lands. You implement capitalist ownership, and then you can buy land off of individual owners who suddenly have the right to sell. Individual owners can be recompensated, bought out, expropriated, legislated out of influence, or plain old overruled or coerced. So capitalist ownership really does something very intense to attachment to land. So see how capitalism and nationalism facilitates land abuse by rupturing ownership and land connection, while nationalism co-opts our allegiance from the land. Capitalism disempowers communities by fracturing them into individual owners. I have another video about how sacrality and ownership are actually related important concepts in order to understand animism. And if you want to learn more about landscape animism in Northern Europe, then I really do recommend my online course, Land Connectedness 101. So thanks for listening, and bye-bye from the farm where I was born here in Eastern Jutland. See you all around.